Okay, the Blue and Gray series. Um, I got the fifth wheel out of these, and I have no idea how this is working. But, the S&T game on the subject from the series. Can't even remember what it's called. We did that video for it a while back. And actually, my enjoyment of that convinced me, hey, I want to take a look at more of these old style, quad style games from the SPI era, because the graphics are so superior to those in the Avalon Hill, sort of similar period, the classics, as it were. Well, I guess what I learned is I can have fun with one, maybe two of these, and then I'm really fatigued of them. The third and fourth ones started hurting me a lot, just in terms of these games have a much more, and I've said this a number of times through the playthroughs, much more of a chess-like feel that I'm happy with. I don't really like chess. I don't like worrying too much about the specifics of the geometry. I like to act on either very simple sort of patterns or just sort of feeling as to, yeah, I'm sending enough force there for the outflank. I'm doing this. I don't want to be stuck with very carefully counting the hex distances that I have to move, and that's the case really in the Antietam one more than anything else. But some of the terrain in all of these is a little hard to operate through, and then even more than that, working really hard to get on the odds chart that I want to get on. I prefer games where you're not doing all that kind of what really amounts to pre-calculation before you take your move if you play the game sort of seriously in a competitive fashion, because you're not allowed to, rearrange your pieces. It's a pain in the ass, even if you do allow it. It's like, you'll probably screw something up. So it's a good reason to be like, yeah, if you've moved a piece, you've moved it, and that's it. But what it means is you're likely to get some of your odds fucked up, to make attacks that aren't so good. That said, some of these seem to play better than others, but I don't know how much of that is sort of my fatigue with the system. I liked the first one I had, and I've kind of come to that realization late in life. Trying to remember what the fuck it's called. My mind is on to Richmond. It starts to go as you get older, and the more games you get, the harder it is to remember them. But that was a part of my first set of war games, of real war games. I had played things that were war game-ish, obviously Risk, Battleship, stuff like that. The Milton Bradley Skirmish was the first big one for me, but some of the earlier ones as well I had played. And I'd played Origins of World War II, which isn't a war game because it's about politics, right? But otherwise, it's kind of an area control war game in terms of the mechanisms used. So I had seen some things that had given me hints and tastes of, what could be, right, and what actually was, and I just wasn't aware of it. And then I bought that and a collection of games. And it very quickly was obviously not a lot of fun to me. I had to compare it to Stonewall, out of, you know, I had two American Civil War tactical titles. One was that, and one was Stonewall. And while Stonewall was a hell of a lot more to my liking, and it still is, I much prefer tactical games where there's firepower and morale checks and all kind of shit like that going on in them than I do ones where it's really trying to manipulate the geometry and get things to work right. However, coming back at it, and you know, I played it a couple of times over my life, but coming back at it after many, many years doing it on video, it appealed to me more than I remembered it appealing. And that drove me to get the rest of this series. And I may have some from the second Blue and Gray too. At the very least, I have other games that are kind of similar to these that I've been picking up in some quantity. And I think that was probably a mistake because I have a very low tolerance for how many of these I can take in any given period of time. And one of the problems is once I sort of start getting comfortable with, you know, what you have to do to play these properly, I start getting tired of them at the same time. If these had been the only things that were out there for wargaming when I came into the hobby, I probably would have, like a lot of minis gamers, abandoned them. I knew a lot of guys in old minis, in a minis group that I had, a little older than I was. They were from the classics era. They were like, well, these games were good, and then all kind of complex games came out that were too much for them, especially when you started getting into the non-tactical stuff, because the tactical stuff honestly was about the same level as the minis they were doing. And, you know, they just felt like, well, if they were going to put the detail in, they wanted it in the minis. They didn't want to go overboard with that still either, but they wanted a little bit more historical accuracy than these suckers could provide. And didn't want to be learning new systems or very different new systems all the time. Great. You know, I probably would have gone along the same route had I had similar experiences to them, and would have never, I don't know, maybe the complex stuff would have caught me, because as soon as that, you know, basically as soon as I started, it was more complex things that were drawing me in right away, and oh, could there be more? All right, why don't we talk about, and honestly, the On to Richmond, I probably reviewed that pretty much as well as I'm going to review this, but let's take another look at it. Very, very simple movement in combat, very fixed zones of control to the extent that you can't withdraw out of them. That is a little weird to me, but it creates the situation, which is the way you hurt things in this game, which is you usually cannot get enough force to actually kill something on the combat results table. You might be able, if somebody leaves, you know, a flank lying open or something, to get a piece into an ugly enough position where you can destroy it. You might be able to retreat some pieces from the line and destroy one part of the line by using the retreats as well. But usually what you do to hurt somebody is you march up to them, you attack them, they retreat, you advance a unit, and now they have to attack you, presumably at bad odds, because it's really hard to get a grip on a piece of the line and get a good attack in. In terms of realism, that works fairly well in general. It's just a fucking headache to play out. I like the optional role, which we'll get to in a little bit. Let's keep looking at what else there is. Artillery has the capability to fire over other units. So artillery is one of the few ways that you can get an edge on your attacks. It seems a little too flexible and offensively oriented in these games. maybe that kind of artillery fits better in the Napoleonic style, although there, again, you kind of want clean line of sights. You don't want, it's not really like, oh yeah, we can bombard over another unit. The idea being maybe there are gaps in the line that allow the artillery to fire, although that didn't often happen, so I don't know how much you really want to consider the effect of artillery on this. It feels almost World War II-ish, like mortars firing and stuff. Not that there aren't mortars in the Civil War, but they weren't really these mobile artillery pieces. I guess the biggest thing in the game for me in terms of deciding what to do is the optional roll on attack effectiveness. Now, what's weird about this is conceptually, I think it adds something to the historical accuracy of these games. It, first of all, makes sense. Units attack, they're repulsed, they may not be ready for another attack. The recovery mechanism, which is it has to be at nightfall, on all except one scenario, what is it, Antietam, I think it's Antietam, had the, I didn't play with it in the Gettysburg. Antietam, I think, had the, you recover on a die roll, which I really like, because units could sometimes form up and launch another attack. They didn't have to rest over the night. I would give them the free recovery overnight, but if it wasn't overnight, let them make the die roll. And I think I would rather extend that to all of them to give a little bit more shake-up in the scenarios. Without that, attacking at 1-to-1 odds doesn't really put you in an ugly position at all, because if you retreat, the defender has the option to advance, but then it's his burden to attack on the next player turn. So you don't get that sort of bonus that you get if you force the defender to retreat, where you can make him attack at bad odds and hurt some of his units. Well, it does have a few weird cases in it, though, which is like I launch an attack and the units which have, if my units fall back and the other attacker are ineffective, well, if somebody else launches an attack on them, they have every capability to destroy them that they'd have on a regular unit, except that they can't force those units to attack again. So if a lot of your line is attack ineffective, they get the ability to just keep falling back safely without a prop. You can make some arguments about in favor of that, but I don't think they really hold the water terribly well, because whatever the system's trying to do, if I'm attacking you and now I'm forcing you to counterattack, that's not like I've gotten your blood riled up or something and you're coming at me. It's really showing more of the continuous effects of the attack. It's an abstracted, not showing you exactly how things are working. It's rather something that's a gamey mechanism trying to show some of the effects of the strains of that continuous pressure. And that you'd have to throw reinforcements in, that you'd have to try to hold the line. It's hard to disengage from a battle line. Well, these attack ineffective things, I mean, they're not routing, they're not leaving the battlefield, they're not disintegrating. They're still just as good on defense, and in fact, maybe a wee bit better, because they don't have to counterattack. That's one thing that bugs me about it conceptually. The other thing that bugs me about it is more of a factor of how they apply to the games. So if one player is regularly on the attack, and I think Antietam might be the best indicator of that. Shiloh was the one I had the most problem with, though. One player is continuously on the attack. They are probably more affected by this attacker ineffective role than the other player. And in that case, there becomes a serious play balance monkey wrench, essentially. If the game was balanced for without that option rule, it probably is no longer balanced once you throw it in. I think the others actually hold up fairly well for it. Kind of hard to tell. I mean, theoretically, Chickamauga is probably another one where it's hard to tell because I screwed that up so much in terms of missing an important thing that I had to defend as the Union and basically losing the game by not being aware of that for either side. But the Confederates kind of blundered into a victory that way. But yeah, if one side has the burden of the aggressive action on them, I think they're more harmed by that because they can't try to make a low odds attack in the hopes of pushing you off that good terrain and being able to force harder without a risk that their units won't be doing another attack. And that kind of dampens your chances, your willingness to make those low odds attacks, and it also when you do have to make them, if you come to that decision, could come with a high price. So that's one of the facets there. Yeah. Overall, these games don't really. They don't give the kind of story that I like. They don't give the detail of the story. They're not trying to model at a level that sort of tells me what's going on terribly. All I get to really see is the broad formations. Another thing is, each of these has its own victory conditions, which is pretty standard, for sets of games in a series. Things are different on each battlefield, but you look at them and you kind of scratch your head and say, wow, they made some weird decisions. So, for example, in the Gettysburg, there's no terrain victory conditions, which is odd for a Gettysburg game. I like that in some ways, because neither army's goal at any point of it was really, yes, occupy this terrain because it's so important to the operational stance of things. That's what terrain victory conditions should be to me, because they drive the players to do not what was necessarily historically done, but what was, they drive them by the same motivations that the generals would have. On the other hand, because the way the victory points are handled in most of these scenarios, if someone gets a quick victory point advantage by killing a unit early, basically in the Cemetery Hill in particular, they have won the game unless the other player is able to inflict casualties on them. So they can just sit back and say, screw you, man, I don't need to do anything. I'll be on the defensive now. And we had that where the Confederates could have basically put the win in their pocket, or at least forced the Union onto the attack. It's kind of an interesting situation. It didn't work. It didn't play out that way, but whatever, because I'm overly aggressive, and because they're actually, in all except for Chickamauga, there are proportional victories, so you have to get multiples of the other player's victory points in order to get to higher levels of victory, like 1.5 or whatever. It doesn't have to be 2 to 1 or whatever. But the better you do in terms of your kill ratio, in terms of, by the way, the spider was successfully extracted outside. I don't think it looked as big on the video as it did in real life. I mean, it wasn't huge. I've seen equally big, but it was big. But there's certain, losing my train of thought, there's a desire to do better than you're currently doing, and in fact, that affected Shiloh as well. You know, the Confederates could easily say, well, I'm winning at Shiloh. I can put this in my pocket. Antietam had a serious victory point location in it, for good or ill. And that sort of directed the Union to having to attack harder than maybe they would in some of the other scenarios. But the honest thing is, the real goal in almost all of these tactical battles is a matter of destroying the enemy army or rendering it ineffective for some period of time or whatever. And that holding some terrain objectives in a location, usually in a tactical game, isn't going to be the main operational goal of the campaign, which means a successful battle, well, if the situation doesn't look that good, you would probably want to move somewhere else and fight it in a different battle, make it another attempt. It's only in cases like Agincourt where there's really kind of a do or die type situation on the tactical field. Now, obviously, you could look at Stalingrad and say, well, Hitler's orders made that a do or die. And okay, I'll take that as fair too. You know, you wouldn't want the generals able to countermand that when they know they're be facing a firing squad if they don't do what they're supposed to. But I think at Gettysburg, you could make a pretty good argument for the Confederates not engaging there. And so by not having terrain victory conditions, you kind of allow that situation to develop a little bit more. But it develops for the wrong reasons. If the Confederates are doing well early on, they choose not to engage there because they don't have to attack to win the game anymore. They instead take a defensive posture, which actually doesn't make a damn bit of sense, because if the Union's allowed to sit in their way and stop them from going further, they've succeeded as far as I'm concerned. So what you kind of gain out of it isn't really any real historical advantage. The other side of it, though, is games where you do put victory conditions on the hexes to force people to defend the things that historically were important in the battle. Well, that allows the battle to develop more like it did historically, but again, it's for the wrong reasons. You know, it's like Cemetery Hill wasn't that important. The Confederates could have bypassed it. They could have done something else. And in particular, I found in Chickamauga that was the most kind of weird thing about it, because Chickamauga, the battle developed in a very strange way, and it's very hard to believe that the game would ever develop along that way unless you placed the victory condition hexes in such a way that the Union has to defend kind of unimportant things compared to what their overall goal is. It's not a bad place to defend, but it's not a do or die situation. They had fallback possibilities. They didn't take them. So, you know, they ended up in a really, really horribly deformed line towards the end of the battle that was actually segmented and Confederates pushing between them. But you're not going to get that without that kind of scripting through the victory condition hexes, unless you have some other weird things. Other weird things that could cause that is like the command rules that are present in the CWB series, for example. Anyway, you know, these things are playable. There's a certain amount of enjoyment to them, but there's such a fatigue level to me to the calculating the odds, to the trying to figure out the geometric best approaches on a very small scale, as opposed to broad sweeping, yes, I can get my forces there and they will be more effective. That I generally stay away from these, and I probably should not have bought as many as I did. But, you know, whatever. Anyway, that's my feelings on would be great, at least. At the very least, I like the pushing, the combat results tables that SPI has with the pushing, because the Avalon Hill ones just cause too many casualties too easily. But I think that pushing makes these actually more of chess-like, competitive spirited type games than the Avalon Hill games were. Those tend to often fall down to it. Well, can I get my 2-to-1 here to work? Will it work when I need it to? Because my timeline has to fit that. In these, it's more, it's less likely to devolve into a single lucky die roll or something, although there can be important places where there are such. It's just, you're more likely to be trying to push the enemy in on himself so that you can start crushing him like a nut, Alright, had lots of thoughts about what I'm doing next, but I think we're going to be doing probably Dungeon Degenerates, just because I want to get some playing in on it, and my wife and I, our sessions of it did not go as well as either of us hoped, really, and give it another shot. Alright, let's set this up.